Hello and welcome to the Aquarius Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Reed. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by none other than Aquarium Co-Op. Head on over to aquariumcoop.com. Check out all the awesome things that we have for sale at aquariumcoop.com. The Aquarium Co-op coarse sponge filter that sinks instantly to the bottom. Nice coarse foam so you don't have to do the maintenance all the time. It is a wonderful product. Pair that up with some Aquarium Co-op airline tubing with a Zis Never Clog air stone, and you are set to have air-driven, wonderful filtration in your aquarium. Not only do we have things like the Aquarium Co-op sponge filter, we have a wide selection of extreme foods with my personal favorite, the krill flake, that practically everything in my aquarium or in my fish tanks will eat. Couple that with extreme slow sinking pellets or the semi-floating or the fast sinking pellets as well. Fantastic fish food that I actually has kind of turned into my staple super nose. There you go, folks. Super red bristle nose staple food. It's got spirulina in it. It's got krill. Just a fantastic food all around. And the colors that I get in my super reds are fantastic. And in addition to those kinds of products, we have a massive selection of live aquarium plants. Vallisneria, water sprite, dwarf chain sword. What else are we bringing on? Red melon sword, red flame sword. Always trying to keep things like Java moss on steel mats in stock for you. So if you want that for your shrimp tank, we've got it. Floating Christmas moss balls. Such a cool thing to add to your aquarium to get this like mid to lower level water column feature that if you've got shrimp in your tank, the shrimp are going to love interacting with that thing, seeing your fish swim around a floating Christmas moss ball. Those we always like to keep in stock. Well, we like to keep all of our plants in stock, but those usually have no problem keeping those in stock, and they're just such a cool feature to add into your aquarium. Let's see what else. Jungle Vallisneria, Crypt. We recently brought on Crypt Wendeti Green. There's my favorite Crypt, Crypt Tropica, that is just this beautiful textured leaf crypt. So ton of different plants for you. Aquarium Co-op, for the most part, aside from selling you the actual aquarium itself and the fish, one-stop shop, fish foods, dechlorinators, all the accessories you need, aquarium lighting. Right now, we were able to secure some 3.0s, so time-relevant Fluval 3.0s. Head on over to aquariumcoop.com. Now, on to the interview. Today's date is Thursday, December 3rd, 2020. My guest today is Daniel Harnden. Daniel is a longtime hobbyist with over 50 years' experience keeping fish. Daniel's very active on the new Aquarium Co-op forum, sharing his creative projects and helping fellow hobbyists with their questions. So, Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Randy. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Glad to have you on, Daniel. And, in the pre-interview section, you and I, we were already kind of diving into topics and, having a good conversation just before we even hit the record button. So I'm very, very excited to bring you on and looking forward to kind of diving into, all the goodness that you have to share with us.
Well, I hope it's interesting.
I think it will be. I mean, we could start off with the fact that not only are you a fish keeper, but you're also a beekeeper, which, as you said, is the savior of the planet, right?
That's right. What, 1/3 of the grocery store would be gone if it weren't for honeybees.
Yeah, I joke, Daniel. The comment you had made was that people think that beekeepers are the saviors, but you just, your sentiment is that beekeeping is just like any other hobby, and yeah.
Well, and you wonder, how did the planet get along before bees were brought to North America? Somehow the crops got pollinated. So the bees are wonderful, but there is a limit. They're just so wonderful.
Yeah, and I've done zero research, and we're already going to get off on a beekeeping tangent, which is totally fine. But that's something that I think doesn't necessarily get brought up, right? Again, I've done zero research on this topic, but the bees that we have were not native to North America. They were
That's right.
brought here, and then we talk about the decline in the bee populations, but it's a decline in a non-native species.
Exactly. So North America probably has 400 or 500 kinds of native bees that did and still do a lot of the pollination. Honeybees came into Jamestown in 1620 and then actually spread faster than the colonists. So among the Native Americans, honeybees were called white man's fly because they would see those before they even saw the colonists. So you're right, they are non-native.
That's funny. So then bees like the mason bee, right? That's a bee, right? Is that
That's
one of
a
our
bee.
natives?
Yep, that's one of the
Okay.
native bees. So all the bumblebees and the sweat bees and the mason bees, those are all our native bees.
And it's, and I'll, admit my ignorance here. I think it wasn't until I moved up here and I went to one of the more boutique kind of nursery stores where I saw these, these what looked like a birdhouse with a bunch of tubes in it. And I'm like, what is this thing? And it's a mason bee hive, right? And I'm like, I've never seen this before. And at this point, I'm like in my early 30s, and I'm just now learning about mason bees. And apparently, you can buy like the mason bees in like a refrigerator or like the larva or something like that. But this idea that it's always been the honeybee, but no, there's all these native bees that actually do their pollination as well. And then kind of like how does that fit in with the narrative of the honeybees being decimated, and therefore our crops are going to go away.
Well, and you know, you can't believe everything you read in the newspaper, but in the mid 2000s, there were reports that there were honeybee colony collapse, and that our bees were dying off. And it just so happens that the professor who's the lead in that study is Dr. David Tarpey at NC State. And he's looked at it, and it turns out there really isn't such a thing as colony collapse disorder. Bees die in the wintertime for a lot of reasons. The colonies will die. And there is a mite, the varroa mite, that is giving bees a hard time right now. But there's always something. No matter how far back you go in history, it's either wax moths or it's American foul brood, but it's really nothing new. Usually maybe 30% of honeybee colonies just die off every winter, but bees, like tropical fish, make more in the spring. And so there is no real overall decline in honeybee colonies. And just like tropical fish, the most dangerous thing to honeybees and to tropical fish are beekeepers and tropical fish keepers.
That's funny. Nice. And so, thoughts on the murder hornet then, because that's something that we're seeing here in Washington State, and the local wildlife agencies are doing all sorts of creative things to kind of track them down. What are your thoughts on the murder hornet?
Well, you never want a new invasive species, and especially something like that can be predatory. But I think the reason we hear so much about it is, first of all, just the name murder hornet. I mean, that's a great name.
It
That's going to
is.
get you a headline right there.
It's a beastly.
And
It's a beastly bug too. That
right,
thing's
and the
huge.
picture of its face. I mean, that just looks awesome. But we already had European hornets and other things like that are very similar. And I've watched them, pick off a few honeybees in my hives. But a beehive might have 60,000 honeybees, and the hornets eat a couple of dozen. But I heard these murder hornets were really bad, but like I say, you can't believe everything you read in the newspaper. It may not turn out to be what the story says it is.
Apparently, one of their tactics was to actually fit captured murder hornets with some type of a transponder, release them, right? So kind of that like the Judas snake concept, where release it back to the wild and it's going to go, or the Judas goat, whichever the Judas one is. But it'll go back to its hive, and then with the transponder, you can ping it and find wherever their hive is. But apparently, they had made it, and it was too heavy for the murder hornet to actually fly
Right.
back. So they didn't think that design through, I guess.
Well, and there people have fit little transponders to honeybees, and I actually started work on a project where we were putting little QR codes on the back of honeybees, and then we could track their movements as they came and went. But it is really hard to track something that flies out for 3 to 5 miles away and then comes back. So we would just end up tracking when they left and when they came back.
A QR code, like how that has got to be infinitesimally small. Like how many actual data values were contained within that QR code?
So that QR code is just an ID for the honeybee, so
Mm-hmm.
you can know which bee. Because a honeybee it's like the Borg. It's not the individual, it's the colony.
Mm-hmm.
And each one does different jobs. And you may want to know who's a nurse bee and which particular larva is she feeding. And if every single bee in the colony has an individual QR code on its back, you can videotape that, and then that can be digested and the data can be analyzed, and you can produce maps of where every single bee went at every single moment, and you can begin to figure out things like, oh, this nurse bee only fed larvae that she was related to and not the ones that came from other fathers. So
Huh.
you can use QR codes to track individual honeybees.
Do beekeepers have a term for themselves? Like with a tropical fish keeper, you would say that you're an aquarist. Is there a similar term for a beekeeper?
Beekeeper.
Oh, just beekeeper. You keep it nice and simple.
Some people, a beak. I've heard the term
Oh.
beak, but that's just a shortening.
I like it. All right. So my last question, I think, around the beekeeper. Assuming we've even got any fish keepers still listening to this podcast, but the social media YouTube presence for beekeepers, is it on par with like what you see with fish keepers, kind of posting content and whatnot?
It might be, but I have never done a lot of social media. I know
Mm.
my local bee club has an active Facebook site, and I think I've only been there once. So I'm not a good person to speak to that.
Yeah, it's always funny because I am very much immersed in kind of the fish YouTube social media world, just given the nature of my job and doing a podcast. But anytime you go down a DIY rabbit hole, or anytime like you scrape the surface of another interest or hobby, you just see this entire microcosm of B-tube, like B YouTubers, or I got into tabletop wargaming, which is going to be on. I just did an interview with Robert, our general manager. He and I talked about that for about 2 minutes, and there's just a whole world around those guys, and it's just crazy how all these interests. There's massive communities of people that all have that same interest and are just so heavily vested into it that they actually put out content, and others consume that content in mass. So yeah, good stuff. I just wasn't sure if you were aware of it, but I'd imagine we could go down that rabbit hole right now and probably find, the Aquarium Co-op comparable beekeeper channel or whatnot. So, all right.
Well, there's not going to be many people who are as honest as Corey. There's a lot of channels out there, but usually they are selling some product. And it's not like Corey doesn't have something to sell, but he usually tells it. He tells it like it is. I mean, sometimes Corey is too honest.
Hey, no, buy all our stuff, man. That's how we keep the lights on. That's how I stay employed. Buy our stuff. All right, Daniel. So let's talk tropical fish, man. All right. So you've sent me a bio, and there's so much cool stuff going on. But starting in 1969, let's just go back in the Wayback Machine. We'll see how far we can get in the remainder of this podcast. If I have to have you on, another 2, 3, or 10 times to kind of go through this, I'm happy to do it. So, what are your first memories in the hobby? How does it start for you?
Well, I always like things in water. We had a creek in our backyard in our house in Atlanta, and me and the other kids, we would just wade down the creek, and we would turn over rocks and find crawdads and salamanders, and we'd put them in a quart jar and bring them in the house. But the end of the day or the next day, we'd let them go again. But then I got a book from the library, and it was a Henry Huggins book by Beverly Cleary. And in the second chapter of the book, Henry goes down to the drugstore, and he ends up coming home with a jar of guppies. And of course, the guppies breed, and he ends up with jars of guppies all over his bedroom. And his dad tells him, if this continues, Henry, you're going to have 1 million guppies. And so Henry ends up taking the guppies back to the store. And I love this. He ends up getting store credit instead of cash for the guppies. But he uses that money to get an aquarium and then switches over to catfish. But what I took from that story was I could go to the store. I could get a pair of guppies, and I could be that boy with jars of guppies all over my bedroom. And it turned out that was completely true. And I remember that first big fat, squared off, pregnant female guppy. And when I looked at her closely, I could see the little eyes of the baby guppies uh, inside her. And then when those guppies were born, not all of them were gray. There were some gold ones in there, and it was like, how can a gray guppy make golden babies? And so I had to get a book on guppies, and found out that there were different types and that there was this thing called genetics. But I was hooked.
Mm-hmm. What is your opinion of the books that were available in 1969? And I know Enos's, his encyclopedia kind of Bible book, which I do have 2 copies of, one of which is a first edition that I had to go out and get. But what is your opinion on the literature available, the information contained within, versus what, if you went down to your Barnes and Nobles or did a tropical fish book search on Amazon right now, what you could find that's been more recently published in this decade?
So it was pretty good. Most of what I read was from TFH, Herbert Axelrod's publishing house. And it was good information. It was well vetted. It was at the right level. It didn't necessarily get too deep. And for me at first, that's how I learned anything. Or, the people at the fish store. But I loved getting a book that I could take home and read. But I think the quality of those books was very good. And then, of course, also the magazines, the Tropical Fish Hobbyist magazine. I thought that was great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where this notion, and I've kind of espoused it before, but this idea that there was no information on how to properly keep fish and, nitrogen cycle and all that stuff. And it's not necessarily true, because the books back then, some of the older books I have, like, they talked about it, right? It's just the information wasn't somehow being passed. And, maybe it was the mall pet store that carried everything under the sun, all the critters plus fish. Maybe the sales staff there didn't have the information to properly tell you, or maybe they didn't want you to know, because then you'd kill fish and you'd come back and buy more. Like, I don't know. Like, the information was out there, certainly. It's just it wasn't necessarily being passed to the larger public. And this is kind of like a generalization, like just based on my own experience and my conversations with people on this podcast, that everybody would do the 100% water change once a year, bleach the gravel, put it all back together, put the fish in there, and hope everything survived. Or that's just what you thought you needed to do. And we had this idea of nitrifying bacteria, and we knew these things back in the day.
Well, so I don't remember when I learned about the nitrogen cycle and the bacteria. That had to come, 10 years later. But, and we'll get to this, I was the guy working at that department store, pet store. By the time I'm 16, I get my first job there. And my boss, who taught me a lot, knew what she was talking about. And her boss knew what he was talking about. And by the time I talked to customers, I'd been keeping fish for several years, and we gave them good advice. But my memory was, dechlorinate the water. I don't remember chloramines back in the 1970s, and let it age for a day. And we even had live plants back then. I mean, I don't think I ever remember, at least personally, having an aquarium where I at least didn't have some anacris in it. I mean, it's not like plastic plants were popular and colored gravel was popular, but it's still the same formula for keeping your fish alive as now. And we knew what it was, and we told the customers.
You know what? Then I bet is my dad was just stubborn. Because I could totally picture this. Like, little Randy is just so over the moon of being in a pet store, picking out fish, looking at all the different tanks. Somebody's bagging stuff up. Again, I've said before, like, having vivid memories of a specimen container, and thinking the specimen container was like the coolest thing in the store next to the fish themselves. And then the guy probably maybe even telling my dad, like, okay, this is what you need to do. And then my dad being like, okay, cool. But then at the same point, like if we are buying like an African cichlid plus a Molly plus a common Pleco, he's probably like, all right, these people don't know what they're doing. They're not going to listen to me. All right, here you go. Here's your fish. Go home.
Well, we cared, and you try, and some people listen and some people don't. And they will if you beg them hard enough. One of the first, I went into a place, I don't know, I must have been 13. Went into a local fish store called Barnacle Bills, and the Severums were breeding. And once the babies were free swimming, I just begged Bill until he gave me some of the Severum fry to take home. And he said, look, you've got to feed them. And Daniel, if you don't do it right, they're not going to make it. But it's like, no, I have to have these. And of course I killed them. But Bill knew what to do. I just didn't listen to him.
Mm. Yeah. I could. I've got a little bit of that streak in me myself.
But but the not listening. After I got over my guppy phase, I got a 10-gallon aquarium and set it up. I think I had bright blue gravel, had a Pinplax box filter in the corner, and neon tetras were so cool with that bright blue. They were so pretty. And I think I got 3 or 4 neon tetras and put them in there. And like the next week, me and my dad and my brother were out at a golf course because my dad liked to fish golf balls out of golf course ponds. And my brother and I caught a couple of baby brim. And we brought those back home. And I was getting ready to put those in the 10-gallon aquarium with the neons. And my dad said,
oh boy,
don't do it. And I looked at my dad and I said, Dad, don't you know neon tetras are the fastest fish in the world? And he said, And so I put them in there and of course got up the next morning and the only thing in that tank was brim.
I had to Google it. And a brim, for those that don't know, that's a sunfish. So that's going to tell you, that's going to tell you all you need to know.
Yeah, it's a sunfish. It's a big carnivorous fish. And I just burst into tears, but who listens? I knew more than my dad, but that's how you learn.
Yep. And then back then, like a neon tetra was not price point wise as inexpensive as they are now, right?
At that point, so I don't go as far back as Rosario LaCourte, where a neon tetra is like half a week's working man's
wages.
No, yeah. So by 1969, neon tetras were, I don't know, I think they were 10 cents a piece. So
and that would,
I definitely think I remember, at least on sale, them being 10 for $1.
Okay, and so I think right now, what are they, like $1.99, maybe $2.49 a piece for a neon tetra?
Yeah, so that's probably comparable.
Okay. All right.
It's just pocket change.
I'm not trying to date you, Daniel. I'm just like I just assume everything before I was born was relatively much more affordable than things are now. Is just my general perspective on things.
Well, the pet stores were definitely cooler than they are now. So when you would go into a department store, and so the ones that I bought those guppies from, you pass from like the entertainment section where they had TVs, and there would be these freestanding aquatic displays that had baby turtles or baby alligators. And then you get deeper back into the store and there's puppies and cats and reptiles and fresh and saltwater fish. And imagine seeing that in a Target or a Walmart these days. I mean, they just don't have that anymore.
Was this like a Montgomery Ward's kind of setup, or even like was it Sears Roebuck back then?
It was like that. That store at that time was called Grant City, and it was like this was before there were Walmarts, or it was like a Walmart, and then eventually that store was taken over by Richway, and So that's when I started working at that store when I was 16 in 1976. And we sold tegu lizards and African parrots. And I remember looking at the price list of what we could order from the wholesaler. We could have ordered baby chimps,
Oh my
if you
God.
can imagine. I know, I know. I mean, just the horror, right? I mean, that was available on the price list. But
Oh.
All the Richways were eventually bought out by Target. So these were like proto targets is the best way to describe them.
Gotcha. I can't even imagine seeing baby chimp on a buy list. Like
Yeah.
who even delivers that? Does that come on like your 40-foot container for the week of like resupply stuff or jeez.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how that would have been delivered.
You gotta let receiving know that a baby chimp is coming for
Yeah.
the store.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I do want to know. So those guppies in 1969, what did they look like? Like I'm assuming they're not like ultra super Vienna guppy, kind of the things that we have now. What would you describe them as?
So the guppies that I had in the jars, I would say we'd call them wild types or
Mm-hmm.
endlers, but there were fancy guppies. But a fancy guppy in the mid 70s looks like a normal guppy that, when I say normal, a fantail with a lot of color.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that that would have been a show guppy, back in the 70s.
Like they hadn't gotten into Dumbo ears and all the different leer tails and all those other kinds of guppy tail pattern.
So Leartail is a wild type. That would show up all the time
Hmm.
in the wild type guppies I had. That's not a new invention. I think guppies in the wild have
Oh,
that.
interesting.
Yeah,
Oh, so,
and guppy shows. If you read the Innis material, guppies were big in the 30s,
mm-hmm.
and the shows were very competitive, and it was kind of like the equivalent of a breeders award program. I mean, people were cutthroat.
Well, I'm pretty sure the picture that Joe Fredenzi showed me when I was at his house of like a 1930s New York Fish Club meeting where everybody is dressed in their Sunday best. I'm pretty sure that was a guppy bull show, and that
Oh yeah,
whatever exhibition hall wherever they were, it was packed full of people, and all the
yep,
guys were in suits and all the gals were in dresses, and it just looked like everybody was ready to have a Sunday service or like a really good weekend dinner or something like that at a restaurant.
yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So then, all right. So then, as we follow along in your timeline, so the 1970s, you got your first 10-gallon aquarium, your neon tetras. Anything else about that 10-gallon tank?
No,
The tanks
I,
had to have
d-
the tanks had to have been more expensive, though, right? Comparable to now.
uh, comparable to now, and here's why. the I was always amazed how cheaply the store would sell me a tank. And then I figured it out that they would sell me the aquarium below cost, because if I bought the aquarium, then I would buy all the supplies and the fish. So even in the 1970s, and in the middle 70s was right when the all glass aquariums started coming in. So just like the aquariums we know now, that's what you would have seen on the shelves in 1975. If it was 1965, it would have been the Metaframe
Mm-hmm.
tanks, the stainless steel.
With like a
But my
slate
first,
with a slate bottom, right?
not towards the end. So the older Metaframes did have slate bottoms, but there was a phase where the Metaframes had glass bottoms, at the end. And then by the time I buy my first aquarium, it's just like the aquariums we have now.
Okay.
And and a 10-gallon aquarium, I don't know what it was, but it was very inexpensive. Um,
Okay, so that could be on par then with like the Petco dollar a gallon sale,
right.
where I know that a dollar a gallon on a 10-gallon is below cost. Like they're definitely,
Yes.
and I've talked with reps before, and they've had some interesting words to say about the dollar a gallon sale and why they do it. Yeah, so Because it's funny because I feel like I would love to see the Petco sales numbers of how many glass tanks they actually sell. Now, COVID aside, driving so many people into the hobby because they're staying at home, before COVID, what the sales numbers look like outside of $1 a gallon sale versus when they're running $1 a gallon sale, I think it would just be it's got to be astronomically different. And then I wonder how much they're actually teasing out for single order purchases. And what I mean by that is, the us with multiple tank syndrome that go and buy 20 gallon highs all at once. If they're breaking
Right.
it out to actually see, oh, that's one nut job loading up his minivan with 20-gallon aquariums, as opposed to them thinking, oh, look at all of the people we just got into fish keeping because we sold all of these tanks, right? They're not individual
Right.
transactions. They're all like 2 transactions of fish nerds that, and if anything, it could be like the one guy, because how many stories have you seen online of somebody saying, well, I hit up my local, Centralville Petco, and then I drove over to the Shelbyville Petco, and then I drove over to the, the Raleigh, Petco, and I wiped all 3 of them out of 20 longs, and
Right.
it's one person now at this point at 3 stores.
Well, I always feel like, in the end, they know what they're doing. And,
Do they,
we
Daniel? Do they?
well, well,
I've seen some pretty silly things of manufacturers and vendors in the tropical fish hobby. I can tell you that much.
well, that's true. But I remember thinking I got a good deal on a new car one time, and I was talking to the salesman when we were signing the papers, and I was kind of crowing, and he kind of winked at me and says, "Yeah, but we always win." So, yeah, they may lose on individual items, but they mostly know what they're doing.
I'll agree to disagree with you on that one. All right, so 1971, we got white clouds breeding in a trash can outside with hornwort or comma hornwort. Tell me about that.
So I I didn't. My neighbor friend across the street, he got the 29-gallon aquarium, and I really just didn't have the money to get another aquarium, but I could get one of those little blue kitty wading pools. And actually, I think it was a trash can initially, where it was just one of those like Rubbermaid, 20-gallon trash cans, just like now, and filled it up with rainwater, threw some hornwort in it, and put some white clouds in there. And I wasn't thinking that the white clouds would breed, uh, but went out one day and there were these little slivers of like glass at the top swimming around. And I was confused for a moment. And then my eyes got big and I realized, oh my God, the white clouds have bred. Oh my God, I'm an expert aquarist. I have bred egg layers now, not just guppies.
There you go.
And so I was hooked, and that did lead to a kiddie pool a couple of feet away, and started adding more and more kinds of fish to it. Uh, I wanted a fish. Once I was an egg layer master breeder, I thought, well, I can try something like cichlids. So I got convict cichlids. And again, I thought I was a genius because
I like
they
this.
bred right away. But I started putting that sort of stuff in the ponds outdoors, and ponds were great. Anything you put in there would breed, and it was a great place. This is how cool the fish stores were back then. I could get archer fish at this department store, tropical fish store. And so I brought archer fish home and put them in the pond outdoors. And you could see them shoot at mosquitoes and stuff that would land, on the grass that was overhanging the pond. It was really amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I would never have, and again, this is just my ignorance on the kind of history of our hobby, or at least what was available back then. Like, I wouldn't have thought that archer fish were overly common back then, and these would have been the fully freshwater archer fish.
Yeah. And if you look at the literature, there were people, I think, going back, who knows how far this goes back, but I know at least by the 20s or 30s, there were like carnival acts where they would have a lighted cigarette, and the archerfish was trained to put the cigarette out.
That's awesome.
And, I mean, if they were doing that in the 20s and 30s, and now, we're talking about the mid 70s,
Sure.
that's like 4 decades later. So you could get just about anything. And there were some things that were more common, like every pet store had kissing gouramis, because who wouldn't want a kissing gourami? But of course, you take that home and it turns into this huge, aggressive fish that you've got to bring back to the fish store at some point. But most of the stuff, I mean, there wasn't as many dwarf cichlids, as are available. But the same basic stuff we keep now was available back then.
I need to source some TFH magazines that basically hit like one every 5 years and just kind of take my time and go through them and just build this better sense of what was available, what people were working with, what kind of the thoughts and sentiments and research that people were doing, because it's just kind of grasping at straws with these assumptions, like and like with Joe Ferdenzi having his full catalog, maybe you also like him have this extensive library of past articles and past issues of all these different fish publications from back in the day. That's one of the things, that's why he keeps them. Periodically he'll just pull one off the shelf and take a look at it. It's kind of a reminder or to discover something new about what we were doing in the past in the hobby for that better perspective.
Yeah.
And so then again, like kind of to help, move the fog of my ignorance, like the white clouds, those also were pretty common. And then when you bought them, did you know anything as far as like their hardiness or temperature, temperature preferences or anything of that nature?
Yeah, because I had, there was a TFH book, Exotic Tropical Fish, and I don't think I had the Ennis book. Herbert Axelrod stole all the photos from the Ennis book to put in his book. And Ennis won the lawsuit, but they only awarded him $1 in damages.
Oh, jeez.
Herbert Axelrod was quite the character. But, you could go to the 2 pages on white clouds, and it would say, tan Ichthys albanubes. These come, origin White Cloud Mountain in China, very hardy in cold waters, easy to breed, and it would give you the rundown of what you needed to know about that fish. And that was a $5, 350-page book that covered every species of tropical fish you were likely to find.
Yeah, that's just me needing to remind myself that you can actually look things up in books, and there's information there. It's not just all on the internet.
Yeah.
And then,
but what I don't remember there being a lot of information about, though, was plants and how to grow them. And I remember the first time I saw a nice planted tank. I was in 9th grade. I would have been about 14. And my biology teacher, Mrs. Lemon, had one on her front desk, and I was probably like a 40 or 50 gallon. It was a metal frame tank, and it was heavily planted. Must have been Vallisneria. I didn't know my plants back then, but she had live bears and Cordor's catfish and neon tetras in there. And I sat on the front row, and I would just stare at that fish tank, and I wanted to live in that fish tank. But that really set this image in my mind of what a fish tank could look like. It could be a forest of plants with schooling fish in there, and just a beautiful little piece of nature. And I think that's what I have spent the last 50 years chasing, is Miss Lemon's fish tank from the 9th grade.
Wow. Well, one, I'm impressed that her desk was that large to have a 40 or 50 gallon tank on it. And then
it was
still.
This was a science class.
Okay.
So not only did she have a big desk, but it was like a lab bench, with the black soapstone top. And so the fish tank was on the lab bench portion. But so this is not like an office desk. She was almost up on a little platform. So
that's super cool. And
Yeah,
then,
and me and Miss Lemon came to a bad ending. I would love to track her down through Facebook and say, look, it worked out. But I would get bored in class and I would read. I was reading a Michener book, Hawaii, and she caught me doing it. And she said, Daniel, you have to write 500 times. I will not read other books in class. And I was a little troll even back then. And I think it was half of a 3x5 card. And I sharpened up my pencil and I did this micro writing. And I wrote 500 times on this little tiny piece of paper. I will not read other books in class. And when I turned that in, her face just turned beet red. She took me by the collar and she hauled me up to the principal's office. And she said, look what he did. And the principal looked at it and said, he wrote the sentences, but she wasn't done. So when we got back to class, she didn't let me go back to my seat. She sent me to the glassware storage area behind the classroom. And for the rest of the semester, I had to wash out glassware. And she didn't let me back in the classroom. And I thought, well, fine. But she'll pass me. No, she gave me an F. But I've always wanted to track her down and say, Miss Lemon, I became a biology person because of you. Sorry about me reading the other books.
that's funny. Wow. Well, yeah, I mean, that's definitely, clearly, like, you've got inspiration from her, and, certainly, like, you recall that tank. But, yeah, I mean, it's a good thing you didn't go to Hogwarts or anything where,
No,
with the magic that those teachers had, and, ends up, like, engraving in the back of your hand or something.
no,
Yeah.
and she taught us real biology. We dissected a sheep eyeball. We dissected a frog. We were required to keep like actual scientific notebooks. And everything I learned in that class has stuck with me until today.
No, that's awesome. The art. Let's go to the Archerfish pond again. So you've got this, and here's like a little plug to the forum. But you've got a post that you started. Show your earliest fish keeping photos, and your mom. You had said that she dropped off some photos. You asked her, "Do you have any photos of you keeping aquariums?" And you've got was it like four or five? Actually, no, you got a good number of pictures in here. Maybe like 6 or 7 pictures. And one of them is from 1975, and it's the Archerfish convict cichlid blue pond kiddie pool. Do you
Yep.
recall what plants you had in there, and like how that thing was set up?
So at first, it was just wild collected, from a ditch. And so it would have been like cattails and alligator weed. But then later on, I was buying plants, from the store, and it would have been hornwort and anacris, which we called elodea. But it would have been floating plants.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have anything that I remember rooting back in that time.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember ever having any like pest issues with that pond or any of your ponds in general, like raccoons, possums, or anything that would come and prey on the fish?
No, I mean they could have, but there were never any fish missing. So no, I don't remember anything.
Mm. How long did you keep like this kiddie pool up and running?
That was maybe 3 or 4 years. I moved it to a sunnier location in the yard at some point. But then, you get to be 15, 16 years old, girls, other hobbies, working, and the tropical fish began to fade for me during that time period. And it was the first of many kind of absences from the hobby. And then, 5 years later, you come back and you hit it harder than you did before, and you go crazy. And then there's another absence, and then you hit it again. And I think the reason I'm so fish crazy at this point is I've been doing this cycle over and over again, and each one is worse than the one before. And I've just had more years to do it.
Nice, nice. I am curious. You would overwinter these ponds where you lived?
No.
Okay.
So these were just summertime.
Okay.
So this was Atlanta, Georgia, and so it's too cold for most. I think I had paradise fish out there but it was too cold for paradise fish in the winter in Atlanta. That's my memory.
And did you bring them into like aquariums in the house, or would you just take them into the store for credit or trade for something else?
I don't remember.
Okay.
Um,
No, no worries.
so much is just going down the memory hole.
No, I know. We're in the early 70s, early mid 70s right now, and I'm having you try to like pull out these memories. If you asked me what I was doing 2 years ago, I'd be like,
Yeah.
I'd have a hard time. So no, I completely understand. And so yeah, where do you want to take it from there then? As we're talking about the ponds, any memorable stories that we don't want to pass up on?
Uh, no, it was just in that time period for me where I really learned about fish was working at a pet store when you have to answer those questions about ick or what is this fungus or what can I put together or what's the right size filter. uh, that's how you learn is you do it every day. And so that was really a good grounding for me was that 1975, 76, 77 time working in the pet store. But I don't think I have too many more stories from that time.
Yeah, and that's just where I'll say again my ignorance, like, oh man, you were actually like helping people with ick back then, and all these other diseases and whatnot.
Randy, I'm telling you,
But there's no YouTube though. How did they know? There's no forums.
If you could time travel, it's just like now. People are the same. The world was in color. And
I don't mean to paint it that way. I don't mean to paint it
Yeah.
that way.
The fish haven't changed. So, it was the same.
Why were me and so many other people then so ill informed about what we were doing in the hobby then? It's just like I feel like it's so easy now to get that information, probably because of the internet. So I guess at this point it's just asking people at the store.
Well,
Is that what it comes down to?
Well, but I would say this about people were equally ill-informed back then.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people could easily kill a lot of fish, and maybe you gave up or maybe you kept with it. But I think I remember at the time a statistic like 1 in 10 homes in America back in the 70s had an aquarium.
I think that statistic still holds true.
Yeah. So, and it's not always the same home, next year, maybe somebody's given up and somebody started doing it.
Yep.
So I guess what I'm saying is it's not any better or worse. I mean, all the people who kill their fish now or have problems are the same people who were killing their fish and having problems back then.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I would say I would hope that it is better or could be better because it's so easy to just type into like a search engine, what you want to get into fish keeping, and then at your fingertips in the comfort of your own home, maybe, you're just laying on your couch and you look this stuff up versus before you'd actually have to go into a store and talk to somebody.
Yes.
Or actually check out a book or purchase a book at a store.
Yes.
So hopefully in that sense, maybe things get better.
Yeah. So maybe it was a little more valuable because you had to try a little harder to get the information, but you didn't have to try that hard. I mean, it's not, what do you do now? You go down to a PetSmart, you ask them what I should buy, what I should put in it, what I should do. I mean, that all seems pretty similar.
Okay, so let's say then the pet store that you worked at was Richway. In the first store in the Richway store.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember of the name. We were like a subcontractor to Richway, and I do not remember the name of the actual company I worked for.
Okay, and that's where your boss and your boss's boss were well informed in how to keep fish properly. Okay,
that's right.
Which would be in the quote unquote big box store, right?
Yep.
Okay. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you had like an isolated incident where like you just worked with people that cared and knew what they were doing, or I don't know.
That's possible, but you could just go down Buford Highway in Atlanta a couple of miles to Pine Tree Plaza, and that's where Barnacle Bill had his mom and pop fish store. And I wish I could time travel and go back and talk to Bill now, but he knew what he was doing.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
he had a breeding pair of Severums, in one of his tanks, and he certainly had more rarer fish than you would get in the department store pet store. Uh, but I don't think it was that unusual.
Could Barnacle Bill get baby chimps though?
Yeah, exactly. he didn't have the connection.
Oh man, it's just the mail order catalog, right? Like, of course, you just get it from Wards in the mail order catalog.
I remember it was a blue typewritten sheet, price list. And I just remember holding that, like, yeah. I mean, we sold tarantulas, and that was one of the ways I would entertain myself is if, there were people coming in who I thought would be freaked out by tarantulas. I would get one out of the, you pick it up by the back legs.
Oh, you're that guy. You're that guy.
I'm that guy.
Man.
Yeah, I would let the tarantula walk down my arm, and they would just, but that, of course, that was the reaction I wanted.
There's something about people that are just so into bugs. It's just, oh man, good times. Yep. Bugs and snakes. Not exactly my cup of tea. So one of the
I would do anything to get attention. So when we went on this Okefenokee trip,
segue,
and
beautiful.
Yeah,
I actually wanted to bring that up.
So you're thinking, oh, and Daniel's going to tell me he caught Okefenokee pygmy sunfish. No, I didn't know what those were at that time, even though they were in the books at that time. To me, it was a native fish, and it's like, how could something that I could just go get out of a ditch, how could that be as cool as something I could get at a store? But I did want to see and catch mosquito fish because they were like guppies. But when we got down there, and I think I was 17, my idea of getting the girls to pay attention to me was to swallow live mosquito fish, like that guy in college, who eats goldfish. And for some reason, that didn't work with the girls, and I was mystified. I thought, well, why don't they want to hang out with me?
That's gotta be like a southeastern United States kind of thing. I don't know. That's awesome, Daniel.
Well, and maybe that is a 1970s thing. Maybe we have gotten back in time, but no, it was. I think it was pretty gross back then. That's why I did it.
That's awesome. I mean, so given that like the past 4 episodes or whatever it's been, there's kind of been this Okefenokee kick, which, as people know from the episode with Robert and I, those fish have not come in yet. And apparently they're going to be collected, or they've got them. They're just waiting on some other fish in Robert's order before they send it to us. But Bob and I do not have those fish yet, so our breeding competition is on hold pending fish arrival. But anything cool about Okefenokee Swamp that you can tell me about as somebody that's actually been there and done collecting?
It's huge. It's big. What I remember was it's kind of like got canal highways, and it does have active, loud alligators in there. So you didn't want to get out of the canoe and get in the water. Whereas now most of the places in North Carolina, it's a little too cold. So when I go out and I collect pygmy sunfish now, I will get out of the boat and walk around. But in the Okefenokee, you don't want to get out of the canoe.
What do you mean? Well, first off, the fact that you're even getting in a canoe to go on the water where there's alligators, it scares me. But what do you mean by loud alligators? What are they doing that makes them loud?
The females make some sort of big thumping, roaring sound.
Oh, jeez. And you're getting in a canoe going out there?
Yeah, but you're safe. I mean, the big lizard's in the water. You're in the canoe. What do they say? They're more afraid of you than you are of them. But, that's fine if I'm in the canoe, but I don't want to get waist deep in the water where I can't see what's going on down there.
That is something else. There's I don't know if you remember if you heard the episode with Ryan Kinney and I, where he talks about the younger guy that goes out there and he does all the micro line fishing.
Yeah.
So he's in all of these like Florida swamps and backwaters, and he's showing all the fungulous species that he catches. And I would love to have that guy on to talk about, just kind of his experience with these native fish and their habitat and all that cool stuff. Like, sure, it's an angling, thing that he does, which, some people may or may not be interested in it that listen to this, but the fact that he can share, his stories of actually going out there and collecting, hook and line, if you will, But that seems like it'd be a pretty cool topic, and I'm enjoying that guy's post because it is all these different fungulus, and he does share his perspective on the prevalence of one fungulus over another in certain bodies of water, and kind of some other biological ecology kind of fun tidbits in these various posts. So I'm enjoying it, and I linked his Instagram profile, and I would encourage people to, if you have any interest in native fish at all, to follow him.
Well, and native fish is um, a thing that over time I did learn how interesting they are. And you never really, unless you travel to Peru or Brazil, you don't really get where your fish come from and what their water is like. And it's really interesting. And I collect banana plants and other plants from the wild. When you can bring the fish home to your house in a 5-gallon bucket in the water you caught that fish in, and with the plants that were surrounding that fish, it's a whole different experience. And the fish are pretty. But I was going to ask you about that thing with Bob, because there's some things you don't know about the pygmy sunfish. Like I remember you reading from the aquaculture site. It's like, we'll take flake food. These things are never, ever going to take flake food.
My assumption was I was just going to keep them on baby brine shrimp, just
Yeah,
hardcore.
that'll work. I think I had plenty of success
But
where it was.
don't share any stories because Bob might listen to this, and then he's going to get those nuggets too. We got to keep it down the download, Daniel.
Well, but the more variety, if you can give them blackworms and mosquito larvae, they'll be even happier. But the other thing you were saying was like, why isn't every pet store in America going to have these things? I'll tell you why. As beautiful as they are, my wife has a nickname for these fish, and she calls them the fish you never see.
Yeah, they're a hider. Yeah.
They're a hider, and you can, if you get the furniture if you get the plants in the tank arranged right, the males will be out all the time, and they do this little waggle undulation where the fins flick in a staccato way, and they're blue and black, and it's just like, oh my God, you can't believe what you're seeing. They'll be out there all the time, but if you don't get it just right, they'll be the fish that you never see.
So here's a thought though. Then like I can completely see where you're coming from. Yet Plecos are fairly popular and drive a pretty high bargain. And how many of these fancy Plecos just hide?
Right.
It's, oh, you've got
Yeah.
a bunch of aquariums with nothing in it. Cool. Oh, no. There's a zebra
Uh,
pleco in there. Don't you worry about that. There's a leopard frog in there. Or there's a candy cane pleco in there. I mean, the bristlenose, those guys are great because they're always out and about doing their thing. But some of these really exotic L number plecos that drive a $60 and up price tag, like those things are hiders, man. But yet we like them.
yep. And the other thing that I thought that you should know, which is these pygmy sunfish, they're not technically killifish in a way that they're just seasonal like annual plants are, but functionally out in the wild, it is almost a completely new crop of them every year. So they really are just kind of a 1-year thing. If you keep them in an aquarium, you could get 2 years out of them, but that's almost kind of artificial. They're really annual fish.
Interesting. So you're saying like in your own personal collection, like 2 years is kind of the max that you've been able to have them?
Oh yeah, oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And they do, and they do great in ponds. The first time I ever got some back in the late 80s or 90s, I brought them home, threw them in a kiddie pool, and they overwintered, and there were more of them than I had put in.
Nice.
So it is a great little tub fish.
Yeah, when you look at the different ones, like I know that in particular we're trying to get the Okefenokee variety, but a lot of them they these pygmy sunfish, they look very very similar, and so
Oh yeah.
short of doing like a full like body fin ray count analysis, I'm hoping that they send me what we ordered, but on their website this company has 4 or 5 different ones that they offer, and they all kind of look the same.
Well, they do all kind of look the same, but I can tell you that website, that you ordered them from. I've ordered other products, and I wanted some Gilberti elasma, and that site had them. And you get what you order.
Nice. Good.
Those people know what they're doing. Um, that's a place I want to go to. I looked them up on Google Earth one time, and it's not that big. You know, you look at the website and think, oh, this must be a big fish farm, and it's just a couple of ponds and you know, like a garage. So that has got to be a really interesting place to go.
Do you know, do they let people come in on appointment only?
If you go to the website, it looks like a place that you can show up in person.
Oh,
I think you need to call them first, but I bet that guy's got a lot of stories, and I know he's been around forever because I was buying stuff from him 20 years ago. And at one point, when I was going to try and grow rotifers or algae or something, he was the place I could get all the flask and the filters and everything from. So he sells a lot of interesting stuff. But the pygmy sunfish, the Gilberti, the Bulkeye, the Ocati, the Okefenokee, you can't even totally tell them apart just by ray counts. I mean, you really have to do the genetic analysis.
Oh, wow.
And they are important in the ecology world because by studying the genetics of pygmy sunfish, scientists have been able to work out the history of the southeastern river systems. And the southeastern United States is one of the great hotspots of fish biodiversity in the world. You know, it's not the Amazon, but it's the next tier down. And it's because as there have been successive ice ages, which when you have an ice age, the water goes into the ice and the ocean levels go down. And so things like Chesapeake Bay becomes a river valley instead of a bay. And all the Outer Banks in North Carolina are all separate river systems, which allows new species of fish to develop because they're separated. So now you start getting different species of pygmy sunfish. But then multiply this all the way down the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, over into Texas. And now we have all these new species of fish. But every ice age comes to an end, the ice melts, the oceans rise, and now these river systems start getting submerged and the species start hybridizing with each other, which actually then leads to even more species because you have the hybrids. And on the forum, I posted a paper that's got the genetics of the pygmy sunfish. So if you go to the forum and you go to the file section, the paper's a little dense, but at the end of it, in the appendix, they kind of show a history of all the different river systems in the southeastern United States. And through the genetics of the pygmy sunfish, they unfold what merged with what over time. And it's just fascinating.
That is awesome. So I'm going to show you how great I am at the forum. I didn't even know we had a file uploading section. Where's that at?
So just append, so you're at forum.coop.com.
Yep.
Okay, just append the word files.
Okay.
And then hit enter.
Forum.aquariumcoop.com/file?
It could be file. I don't know if it's file or files.
I got a Murphy telling me I'm on the wrong page. There we go, files. Okay.
And so the first thing I uploaded was the 1936 Ennis book.
Yes, there it is. Yeah, most downloaded. Yeah.
Yeah, complete copy. And then there were other people who uploaded some really cool vintage items. But somewhere in there,
biography. Is it called biography of ...
Bio? Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Biogeography.
Yeah. And it is dense. This is not light reading, but there are pretty pictures at the end. And that whole thing is about pygmy sunfish.
Well, I'm pretty sure Matt Wagner, who I had on from the Mississippi Wildlife Fish and Game, I think he had mentioned in our talk that the fish diversity in that area is just huge.
Yeah, it's through the roof. I mean, it is world class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I need to sync up with NANFA. I've really wanted somebody from NANFA to come on, and I still do to talk about their conventions whenever they're going to have them again, and then just to talk about the natives in general and the work that that group does. But really kind of driving this wave of enthusiasm for native fish, and that's where just discovering this genus of fish, like wow, these little guys are awesome looking, and fair point that if you don't set the tank up right, they may just hide all day long. But that being said, there's still an amazing little guy that I would love to be able to have a success breeding. Would love to breed him before Bob and just
Yes.
constantly rub that in all the time. But yeah, I mean, this is between the Fungilis, I mean, the Elisoma, like what other, the Shiners, like what, or Darters and Shiners, like what other
Yep.
genuses of our fish that, we as aquarists in the United States are not aware of, but I would guarantee you there's probably some Germans out there or probably some
Oh
people in
yeah.
Asia that are all about our natives. And some of it is definitely like grass is greener on the other side. Like you want what, isn't local to your area kind of stuff.
Yep.
But no, this is great.
Yeah, when I first decided I wanted to do pygmy sunfish, I could only find them for sale in Germany. And it was like,
Oh, that's
what?
awesome.
This is
Yeah, yeah.
this is crazy. And so that's I started reading scientific papers and figuring out where these things really were. And then it turned out you could just go take a big fish net and go to these areas and you could catch these fish and a bunch of other interesting native fish. But yeah, the Germans love these things, and most Americans have never heard of them.
That's funny. Okay, so yeah, I was using the links, and the links were just for the picture. But yeah, I see that to the right there's a download this file.
And that was a big one. I didn't know if the file section would hold that.
51
yeah.
megabytes. Yeah, that's a chunky one.
Oh yeah.
195 pages. I love it. Who's
Yeah, I think it's a person's. It's his PhD thesis, and which is why it's so dense. But the person who wrote that paper has gone on to have a storied career as a professor.
That's awesome. So by Michael Sandell in
Yep.
2012,
Yep.
graduate school at University of Alabama.
Yep.
Roll
And
Tide,
now,
right?
yeah.
Oh, that's super cool. Yeah, I definitely will. I would like to think that I will read all of this, but I definitely will go through
Oh,
this.
oh, you want
Yeah.
because it's the statistical analysis of polymerase chain reaction. Yeah,
Oh,
your
wow.
eyes will glaze.
So,
Yeah,
okay,
your
let me
your eyes will glaze over. But like I say, at the very end, there's a summary. It's kind of like the short version. That's the history
Yeah.
of the river systems in the southeast.
Let me amend my statement. I will read the abstract, and then I will read that concluding section that you're talking about,
Yeah.
and then I'll do a little podcast investigation, and I'll research this this professor, and then I'll do my bugging thing and say, hey, want to come on? Want to come on to the podcast and talk to a guy that knows very little, next to nothing, but will try to engage you in an hour-long conversation?
Well, we got to get you breeding those the Okefenokee pygmy sunfish. I mean, you've got to beat Bob on this.
Oh, it'll
so.
happen. It'll happen.
Okay.
Bob doesn't know what's going on. Come on. I mean, he's had him before, but come on, really. I got you on this one, Bob. I'm gonna give him all the good stuff. Although I don't have too much of an issue with the mosquito larva. Obviously, it's gonna need to warm up before I get those guys. Baby brine shrimp. I mean, I hatch out baby brine every single day, and
Yep.
then also on this order, I do have some Daphnia coming in, and right now
Yep.
I've got one tank that is just completely green watered over, which is totally cool. So hopefully,
Yep.
I can keep that tank in a green water state, and then have that good food for Daphnia. In another tank and kind of a Daphnia only tank and see how that works out. But
Well, you're a better man than me if you can grow Daphnia in an indoor aquarium.
well, that's
I
the
mean,
thing. I've struggled with it outside. I've struggled with it inside, and we're just gonna. This will be probably my third time trying to do Daphnia, so we'll see what happens.
well, I had my first good year, but it was because my neighbor went out of town for the summer and told me to feed his koi. And I put Daphnia in there, and it turned into something where every afternoon I could go harvest 3 or 4 teaspoons of Daphnia out of that pool.
That's
So
awesome.
what you need is a neighbor with, a 7,000-gallon koi pond.
Nice. Well, I did pretty well with just having one of my Rubbermaid 150-gallon kind of feeding trough tote things. I had that thing full of water, and that was going to be my Daphnia tank. I tried to get it going with like spirulina powder and just to try to get green
Yep.
water going in that thing. But that didn't take, but I ended up getting mosquito larvae in there. And I think that's the same tank that I also, one day just scooping out mosquito larvae, I actually had, I had bloodworms in there. I had
Oh
chinominids.
yeah.
And
Yep. Yep.
I was completely not expecting that at all.
Yep. Well, and if we ever have a chance to talk again, what I eventually evolve into later is I live food is its own hobby, and ever since the 80s, I spent a lot of time finding and collecting live foods, and it's almost as fun as keeping the fish, and they're just so interesting.
Nice. Yeah, no, I think definitely we'll definitely have you on for a round two, and if you want to focus on a good portion of that being live foods, I'm all about that because again, I'm mildly selfish with this podcast, and I like learning as much as I like being able to share the podcast with people. So definitely learning what you have to say about live food and your experiences. I would like to say I want to leave the conversation with understanding a little bit more of what, and this is partly a little promo here for the forum, but how did you come across the forum, and what leads you to be so active on it? Because I think, what are you? You're like, what's your title on here? You're like
Oh,
ultra poster or something like that. You've got what is the little fun thing that next to your
it's
name?
it's elite poster.
Elite poster. There you go.
But when Corey first posted the levels back in August, it was a bad screen clipping, and I thought I was going to become an elite puffer. Uh,
That
and
would
I was like,
that
oh, yeah,
that kind of works though, right? Like that would work for a
right,
forum.
exactly. I was going to be an elite puffer. So it was a little bit of a letdown, when I had my 1,000th post and I was just an elite poster. It's like, oh, okay. Um, but the forum, I just lucked into it. I had gotten down. I never get below one fish tank because I've got this really big fish tank in the living room. So even in my inactive phase, I've got one big fish tank. So until June of this year, I had one tank. I had aquariums sitting out in the driveway that I was giving away to neighbors. And then it actually was pygmy sunfish. I thought, I could put some pygmy sunfish in one of these 10-gallon
It
tanks.
always comes
And
back
so,
to the pygmy sunfish.
yeah, and I brought those in, and that was June. And now, here in November, I'm up to 14 tanks. I've got um, 540s, a couple of 50s, a couple of 75s. So it blew back up real quickly. But on the first week of July, I thought, I need a couple of sponge filters to get these things going. And Aquarium Co-op came up, and I realized also in that same search, there was the YouTube channel, and this Corey guy was really just fun to listen to. I just put it on the background and just go about my work. And he said, you should be a member. And it was only $5. So I became a member like on July 10th. And
Of
on July 14th,
of
he sent out
2020? Of
a
2020?
2020,
Wow.
a
Okay.
20. So I'm just days before on July 14th, he sent out an email, I think to everybody who was a member of the YouTube site saying, hey, I've put up a forum. So I joined the forum that day, and it was just a roller coaster ride. There were great people. Bill Smith, he would do these intense projects. He invented the PEX pillar, that puts
That thing is sweet. Yep. Yep.
yeah, it's so well documented. And it became, it was an addiction. I mean, you can tell you, you don't get as many posts as I have if you're not like addicted to it. And then when somebody would like your post, it was like a shot of dopamine. It's like, oh, I have to do this again.
That's awesome.
So, and I think what I can distill the forum down to is this. I learned something new every day on the forum. So
Yeah.
I come back every day because I know I'm going to learn something I didn't start the day knowing.
Well, it gives you a whole different level of interacting that social media and watching people put videos up on YouTube that, just yesterday there was I really like our, introduce yourself section, and there's a gal, I think she's in Oregon. Let's give her, maybe she listens to the podcast, maybe not, probably not. Statistically, I would say. Where is she? So here's her post. It's by Nat, N-A-T, from Oregon. And the title is "Hello from Oregon, Fish and Toddler Mom." And so she, puts up a couple
Yeah.
paragraphs of kind of about herself, and then she starts sharing all of her pictures just around the house. And they're all planted, they're all kind of scaped differently, but not like a pretentious like high end aquascaping, but just like
Yep.
cool, awesome planted tanks with fish in it. And she also has a similar story of like her kids just love looking at the fish too, and my kids love looking at the fish too. And she's had some success with some breeding going on, and whether it's purposeful or accidental, like it's super cool. And like you just don't get this kind of stuff in this format. If all you're consuming is just YouTube and watching the same personalities over and over again, and from my experience, like the other forums that were out there, they're not what they used to be.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, there's just something really cool about this forum, and I hope that it continues to just be a really good place where kind of everybody can come and just share and talk and learn and grow together.
Well, it's average people who keep nice fish tanks and who keep average fish tanks, and you're not afraid to show a picture of your tank with algae and dirty water, or say, I just did this crazy thing. What do I do? Because everyone on the forum, the number one rule is be kind and be helpful, and that is almost always true. I think I've actually read every post ever made on the forum, and maybe twice since July 14th have you had somebody get a little snippy. Everybody's understanding, everybody is kind and helpful.
Well, it's just trolls need not apply. Like if you're a troll, kick rocks.
Exactly.
Like just get out of here.
Yeah.
No, nobody wants your crap on this forum or in general. Like people, go do something else. Do something productive.
Yep.
Or if you troll and you get banned, reflect on it, realize that you probably shouldn't have done that, and make a new screen name, come back, and be a positive person.
Yeah, I think there's only been 2 people banned ever. And they wanted it. You could tell. You could tell.
They
They wanted to be banned.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we've got 2,399 total members. I feel like this is a pledge-a-thon. We're like, come on, folks, let's get that 2,400th member of the forum. We've got most online 203 people at one time. We've got a new member joined 1 hour ago. 4,122 total topics for and 3,000 or 31,287 total posts. So, I don't know forum statistics off the back of my hand to compare this to other forums, but that seems like a pretty good start to something that's only been around for a few months. And
Well, and it's continually growing. But shh, Randy, don't tell it. It's a wonderful little village.
it's a
Just
wonderful
we got to keep it our secret.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Now we got to spread the word. Spread the word. Get people on the forum. No, I agree with the kind of that village sentiment and wanting it to kind of stay. You want to keep it how it is, and I think we have the mechanism and the people in place and that kind of general attitude to, as new people come aboard, like they see what the forum's about, and I don't think we'll ever let it slide into something where it's divisive and allows trolls to do trolly things and whatnot. So I think it'll stay a village. It's just going to be a bigger village.
Yeah. Well, it's a wonderful place. There's some really smart people. I know that, I can roll out some of the scientific stuff, but it better be true, because coronal mass ejection Carl will check up on me and say, did you mean parts per million, Daniel? But he'll say that in a nice way. But there's also, Kenneth, one of my favorites. He started with plastic plants and a light blue gravel. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And he was having trouble keeping his fish alive, and that was in July. And I saw a post from Kenneth the other day, and he's got a wonderful planted tank with nice aquascaping.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the forum is about. You come in at whatever level you are, people help you, and it's all okay, and we're all having a good time.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really do this hobby alone. I mean, you could, but you're going to be so much more successful if you actually share your experiences, share your hardships, share your successes, and then just learn. And actually, let's do this right now. I took a picture of my son's aquarium in his room. It's a little 10-gallon. I'm going to post right now, Daniel.
Okay.
Let's go to Randy's followed content. Hold on, I got to get the Teams thing out of the way. Manage followed content, because the one thing I do need to figure out is how to kind of set my alerts a little bit better. So I still need to. I sound like such an old person. Like, I don't know how technology works.
Yeah. Imagine what I feel like.
What are you talking about, man? You're a master at this thing. You probably run laps around me. All right,
So,
here we
yeah.
go. Randy's fish room post, where Randy puts all the stuff, where he shows that he's a complete newbie at heart and in actuality. Heil here. This is live, folks. This is riveting.
Yep. I'm on your page.
Of the 10-gallon. Oh, not 210-gallon. I had one of those.
Your last post was you've got a picture of a tank, crushed coral, check. Easy planters, check. Anubias nana, check.
Yep.
New breeding project.
Yep.
Although you don't say what it is, but
oh, you know me, I'm secretive. So actually, those
Yeah.
fish landed today. There's two different species. One of them came, the other one that we got shorted on. Oh, actually, in that picture, can you see the tank with the green water in the reflection?
Oh, the reflection.
That's the
Yes.
So that tank is the 30 breeder that I recently set up with my gold.
Discus.
No. This one's gold leertail molly. So this is the one where if you go up, I believe I shared it, where it's just this real nice, clean looking 30 breeder with two easy planters, kind of off to like the thirds, with I don't know, like Windelov or Dwarf Sag. It's that tank. But the light was so intense and I feed it so heavy that it's just turned into this green water bloom, which I'm totally cool with.
Well, and that's the thing. When people post, how do I get rid of my green water? It's like, no. Tell me exactly what you're doing, because I value the green water tank.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
that's
totally.
That's the key to raising baby fish.
Well, so my discus, like I wasn't trying to work with the one pair that I have that are consistently laying eggs. Granted, half the time they eat them, half the time they'll eat the wigglers at like the first day in. Their tank bloomed with green water, and I didn't put a UV sterilizer in there because this order that we're getting with the Okefenokee sunfish is supposed to have Daphnia, and so I'm like, no, I need this green water. I want to be able to see the discus breeding and maybe pull eggs or maybe pull fry when they get to a certain point. But, I just let the tank go because I wanted that green water. Since then, the green water's gone away. And now this molly tank has just blown up with green water. And so I'm like, come on, Daphnia, get here because I've got the green water. And hopefully it's just like my recipe right now is take a Fluval 3.0, put it on 100%, and feed that tank heavy like crazy.
There you go.
It's still in the auto water change system. It's got the plants. It's got Zis filtration. So I think that's all good. But yeah, hopefully the green water sticks around. And the only thing and maybe you can give me some advice on this one or your thoughts. Is the green water potentially impacting breeding?
I wouldn't think so, because when you see what it's like for wild discus, and are you asking about discus?
No. This 30 breeder has the Leartail mollies in it.
The mollies. When I've seen mollies in the wild out in Florida, it's generally been pretty clear, but maybe that's kind of a self-fulfilling thing. I didn't see the mollies that were in the murky water. But remember when Rosario LaCourte would tell his stories about being down in Brazil, and he said, I'd stick my hand in black water. You couldn't see my own hand. But those fish were the most colorful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it would impact breeding. I mean, fish don't live in pristine water most of the time.
Well, and that's the thing. But maybe these guys, though, these live bears, these mollies, maybe they are coming from a clearer water, and the fact that their form of reproduction is not egg scattering,
right?
Maybe there's something to that. Because I haven't really swung a net around in there. I have pulled the initial fry that were born in clear water conditions. They have since moved over. There's maybe one or two that I still need to get out of there, but I don't think I have seen any since.
Yeah.
And so that's
Well,
where I'm wondering, like, is the green water impacting these guys now, in their ability to chase down a female or to lock up with her or whatever it is for the live bearer production?
Well, it's only got to work once, and then she's good for a while.
Right,
And
right.
there is I don't know if this story turned out to be true, but the story with the original Endlers was that John Endler found these off the edge of a dump in just murky, murky green water, and the theory was they were so colorful because that's what it took for the females to see the males.
Mm-hmm.
So that's at least a live bear green water story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who knows if that's true, but male live bears are so persistent. I mean, a male guppy will mate with a dead female guppy repeatedly. I just can't imagine anything standing in their way, much less something as simple as green water.
No, I believe that. They're definitely the males are pretty crazy. All right, so here is my picture. Let's go. Somebody's gonna call me out that I need to put more water in this tank.
Well, no, we're going to be kind and helpful.
Boom, submit reply. Here we go. All right, Daniel. Now you can see it. Folks, that's a first. That's a podcasting first of actually
Yep,
posting
there it
to a
is.
forum. Yeah, so
Randy's
that's
fish room just had a bit of activity, and there it is. And it's got are those cardinal tetras or
those are
neons?
cardinals. Yeah, my
Yeah.
son was very insistent that he wanted some cardinal tetras in his tank.
Well, good for him.
Yeah, so I've got some coffifolia in the back on some driftwood, which this thing like it grows two new leaves, loses a leaf or whatnot, but that in general that coffifolia is doing well. I think that's Nana next to it.
Yeah.
And then off to the left is some newer Windalob that I added in the corner. You've got SpongeBob's house kind of sitting there. SpongeBob himself is covered up a little bit with that center mass of Java moss. And
Yeah.
then that Dwarf lily bulb is just loving life in there.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, which to be fair, I hate it when the lily pads get to the surface. Like I like it when it stays all bunched and under the
Hmm.
water level. Like to me, that's the best. And it's just I've just been too lazy to actually trim it. And then in the very very far back, you can see the reflection on the side glass, but that is the one of the prototypes of our Aquarium Co-op sponge filter. It's a much smaller size of the Nano that we were considering going with, but
Yep.
we felt that it was a little too short, and that's why the Nano that we have is, its current height. This one is about at least an inch or a full inch and a half shorter than the current Co-op Nano sponge filter that we have.
Well, you have to be careful with those reflections because I get up early in the morning. I'm not completely dressed. And it's like, oh, I'm going to take pictures of this tank and I'm going to post it on the forum. And I go, oh, I cannot post that picture I just took. And it's not the fish tank, it's the reflection.
That's funny. Yeah, yeah. No, that's definitely like, yeah, social media posting. And actually, the picture of the one above it of me showing the new breeding project tank, I'm actually crouched down super low, holding the camera,
Yeah.
so you can't see me in the reflection because I wasn't like, my hair was just, standing on end, looking absolutely ridiculous, I haven't had a haircut in like a year except for trimming the sides, but that's why, because I wear a hat all the time now, which is why I'm wearing a hat as you and
Yep.
I talk. So you don't have to see my hair in all its glory. But that's again kind of getting off topic there. But yeah, no, it's funny that you can see the green water tank. Yeah, so that 30 breeder on the left in the picture, that's the Molly tank. And I did post to Instagram the picture of one of the adults in there, and they're just a hog, just this chunk of a molly. And then to the right of it, that is the dedicated 30 breeder for the super red longfins. So
Uh-huh.
I've since moved them from a 30 breeder on a different rack that they shared with a whole massive cherry shrimp. And my thought was that I wasn't seeing nearly as much spawning, egg clutches like I was with normal super reds. And my thought was that maybe the sheer number of cherry shrimp are just irritating them. And so I've since moved them to their own dedicated tank because ideally, for me in the fish room, it was working with albino bristlenose. Okay, well I've done that, and those are really really common. Then I am breeding the super reds, normal fin, kind of in mass. Now that not that those are so much starting to get common, but now it's I want to shift it and really just crank out all the long fins and be able to supply those with the shop. Because at the end of the day, kind of what I want to do is supply these fish, and then hopefully if I can do it consistently enough, we can actually just offer a better price in store
Yep.
than, what we would get if we're buying them from the wholesaler. Because one, the long fins are not nearly as common on the wholesalers list.
Right.
And two, when they are on there, they are expensive fish. So yeah, that's kind of one of my hopes, and just kind of have that little mark on the co-op of oh, if they're long fins, they're going to be from Randy, and he's able to bring them in pretty consistently for us, and kind of have it as a staple in the store at a good price.
Well, I'd buy a fish if Randy bred it. Just that would just be cool.
There was a gentleman in the store, and I forgot to catch his name, but he was I was going in the store, and we're only letting so many people in at a time, and I needed to drop off fish, and I told him, like, oh, I'm an employee here, as I kind of cut the line to take my bucket in. And he's like, oh, I know who you are. And he comes later on in the store, he's like, oh yeah, and I've got your super reds I bought last year, and they're actually breeding in my tank. And I'm like, that to me, like, that makes it all worth it. Like, there's that's just like one massive part of the experience for me is, breeding the fish, but then also knowing that it's going somewhere to a home that somebody's like legitimately going to have fun and be successful with. Like, that's just so much icing on the cake right there for me.
Yeah, that's when you and I, for just a moment, get to be Rosario LaCourte, where it's like I actually did something that made the hobby a little better.
Yeah. Did he talk about, in my first interview with him, I don't know if you remember or not, I'm trying to remember, but it's in his book where that one company wanted to do like a have your own aquarium at home kit, and part of it was actually having the killifish eggs.
So I vaguely remember this from the 60s, or maybe I just read it, but it was instant fish.
Yep.
And it was kind of like sea monkeys.
Yep.
Except I think what they sent you was killifish eggs.
And it was him. It was him.
It was him.
In his house fish room. Like, how crazy is that?
Yeah. But you can see why that was kind of, it's like a chia pet, just a flash in the pan sort of thing. But it paid for his fish room.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, that success level that he's had is just phenomenal. Just absolutely phenomenal. All right, Daniel. Well, speaking of a success, I think this episode, my friend, is I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think certainly a live food episode, and then just coming back and talking about the rest of your experience. I mean, we only hit the end of the 70s, right?
That's right.
We still have a couple more decades to go.
Well, cool. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Daniel, thank you so much.